Hello and welcome, Exiles. Now, we just had a big drop of information, uniques, bosses, changes to the Atlas in a big way, but out of all of it, I want to first cover Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh. These two items end up being a combination set of jewels that allow you to allocate an ascendancy point from an ascendancy you aren't. To me, this is one of the coolest additions to the game because of what it has in terms of build making potential. There's always been times when I'm planning a build and I think of basically a core mechanic, you say. Like, say I want to build around the Guardian's mana reservation to stack a lot of ES. But then a lot of the other nodes in that tree kind of suck. I don't think Ascendancy's the Guardian Ascendancy is really that strong. In a lot of ways, I think it's weak. But say I could be an Inquisitor who has a lot of strong things going for it, and then tag in that node, then we could get really cook and we could really do something with that. And I think that's really interesting. I think that's one of the strongest, basically, contenders for crazy build-making potential this league has to offer. Now, I went through, basically looked at every single Ascendancy, and I'm going to basically go over what I think are the best applications of this jewel, or what I think are basically the strongest Ascendancy points. I'm sure in the comments you guys can tell me what you think are some of the strong Ascendancies, if you think I missed some, or there's some that you think I'm overvaluing or undervaluing. So, to start things off with, because I'm league starting Inquisitor, I'm going to start off with Inquisitor. Pious Path. Since this got introduced with where they changed it to double regen based on consecrated ground, I have always thought this is one of the strongest ascendancy nodes in the game. So if I was making a build where I was a Hierophant or a Guardian and I could also build around Pious Path, I think that'd be pretty freaking cool. The hard part about this is you have to have a way of generating consecrated ground. You could do something like Zealotry or the chess mod that like create consecrated ground if you start stationary and stuff like that. There's options, but I would definitely put Pious Path up there for one of the best ascendancy points that I would snag. And another reason is, you'll notice this throughout the ascendancy trees, is when there's like a two-part ladder to an ascendancy, oftentimes the best part of that two-parter is the second part, and you're going to skip the bad part of Sanctuary is not really that strong, but it's always worth it to go to Pious Path because of how strong Pious Path is. And I think that's the case with other ascendancies that I'll point out as I'm going through this, but Pious Path, obvious top pick for me. One more from the Inquisitor that I would pick as a top pick for this is Righteous Providence. It, in my opinion, is the strongest crit ascendancy node in all the ascendancies. Righteous Providence gives you so much crit chance, especially if you have a character that is int or strength based to begin with, or somewhere in that hybrid. I think it works really well. And obviously, if you are a Hierophant or you are a Guardian, you're in the strength and int area of the tree. You're going to be able to get a lot of value out of Righteous Providence. You can make a non-crit build, a crit build, pretty much solely on the baseline of this, and then work off of it. So for me, if I was going to snag an ascendancy point from the Inquisitor, I'd probably steal Righteous Providence or Pious Path. I think that'd be really cool. Next up for the Hierophant. Now, I am a totem hater, so I'm not going to put much value on things like Ritual of Awakening or Pursuit of Faith. Obviously, if you play totem builds, you know these nodes are very strong, but my personal top pick for Hierophant was Sanctuary of Thought. Going back to when I was talking about things I like to build around, often I like to build around stacking Energy Shield, and one of the cool ways you could always do that was Guardian Radiant Faith. And whenever I would come up with the idea of, I want to stack ES and mana, I would think of being, do I want to be a Guardian for Radiant Faith, or do I want to be a Guardian or a Hierophant for Sanctuary of Thought? And now I don't have to choose because I can get both of the strongest ES stacking nodes in the game if I'm going Guardian or if I'm going Hierophant. And so I think that's pretty cool. Now, obviously, that brings me to my next one, which is Radiant Faith is the other node. If I was going for picking a node from another ascendancy, if I was wanting something from Guardian, I'd pick Radiant Faith. I think it's by far and away the strongest node on the Guardian tree. There's some other strong stuff there. There's some minion stuff. I don't really play minions, so I can't speak to that. Now, moving on, let's go over to the Witch. If I was going to be stealing a big ascendancy point from the Witch, starting with the Cultist, I think it's Profane Bloom. I think explosions and easy explosions to get into the build like that just make everything feel nice. There is so many good nodes in a Cultist. Honestly, I could say something like Malediction, or really a lot of these any other ascendancy points, but I think the one that I would top pick for something that I would just want to tag into another build would be something like Profane Bloom. Now, for example, on the next point, if I was going to steal something from Elementalist, something that's build enabling or cool to make builds around, I would steal Shaper of Flames. But I think this is somewhere where you could make some sort of unique combination. Say you wanted to play an Ignite build, and often the best way to have a fun Ignite build experience is having chaining explosions or chaining ignites that kill the whole screen. And I think combining something like Shaper of Flames with Profane Bloom, where you then explode the enemy for chaos damage and they ignite with that chaos damage and you can scale that, I think that'd be a cool combination. So my top picks for elementals would probably be Shaper of Flames, probably be Profane Bloom. Now, when I'm going over this list of things I'm picking out, there's really just generically powerful nodes like Frigid Wake or Withering Presence or Void Beacon. These are strong nodes. They're good. Heart Destruction, Mastermind Discord, they're just basically really good DPS nodes mostly. It doesn't stick out in my mind as something that I would build around or something I would intentionally plan around. So I'm not really listing those things off. I'm more or less just picking the things that I think are most unique or cool to build around that, but are also strong. So that's why I would pick something like Shaper of Flames or something that allows you to have fun clear like Profane Bloom. Now, last on the list, Necromancer. I gotta be straight and honest with you. I don't play Necromancers. I've played like a couple. I don't know the nodes that well. But if I was gonna pick one, I'd probably pick Unnatural Strength. I think that's the strongest node there. For example, say I was making a Golem-mentalist with an Elementalist node, I'd want to snag Unnatural Strength because I think that's a really strong node for a Golem build. But I'm sure there's other nodes that would be really great to build around, but I don't really know the Necromancer nodes that well to pick them out. For example, Plague Bearer or Corpse Pack could be really cool to build around on another character, but I don't know them well enough to say for sure that's a good one you'd want to take and build around. Now, next up, Shadow. I gotta be honest with you. I don't think Shadow's nodes are between Trickster, between the Saboteur, and between the Assassin. I don't think they're all that interesting or strong to build around. I think they're just kind of generically just decent. But when I look through these Ascendancy points, I don't think I pick like any of these to really pick and build around. I think the one use case I see is, say I'm building an assassin, I would want to steal something like Swift Killer, which is a really good node, to double stacking my power charges. This allows you to stack one more maximum charge than you could previously. There's other use cases like, for example, the Juggernaut has a +1 endurance charge, and say you're doing some sort of Juggernaut stacking endurance charges, you could steal Valakos and get another maximum endurance charge. And that's a cool use case I can see. But I gotta be honest, this is all just kind of like generically strong stuff and nothing super build enabling or interesting to build around. Maybe it's my lack of expertise with mines or my lack of expertise with traps. I don't find any of these interesting enough to build around. Maybe there's a use case where you'd really want just one of these nodes while playing an assassin or a trickster or something, but I can't really pick it out. They're all just kind of generic and not that strong, or in some cases just weak in general ascendancy points. I'm sure some might think Heartstopper is really weak. Even in my use case of doing Righteous Fire with it last league, it kind of was pretty underwhelming, which would have been one of the best use cases for it. To have the best use case for it still be somewhat underwhelming it's kind of a sad result. Anyways, needless to say, we move on. Now, I think for Deadeye, I have to say Gathering Winds, even though you can get Tailwind on a boot mod, Gathering Winds has always been one of the strongest, most defining things about Deadeye. You don't make a Deadeye and not use Gathering Winds. In fact, let's just, for fun, Pee-wee Ninja. If I was going to click builds and I was going to click Deadeye, which, is anyone playing Deadeye? There's 8% playing Deadeye. How many people don't use Gathering Winds? Oh, 99% of people that are playing Deadeye use Gathering Winds. That means there's like one guy that's not using Gathering Winds. Maybe he just hasn't got the Ascendancy points to grab it. I don't know. Or he just can't read. But this is the best node on Deadeye. It's far and away the best node, and it's a node I'd want on other builds, and it maybe gives you more freedom in your boot slot when you're endgame investing, where you don't have to forcibly get Tailwind as a boot mod. So that's probably one of the ones I'd steal if I was one of the other Ascendancies and I wanted to steal something from Deadeye. There's other cool things like Chain. I think this is a really fun one, or the Mark node I think is actually pretty strong, but I think my top pick probably be Gathering Winds. If I'm going Pathfinder, and I'm stealing a node from Pathfinder, it's Nature's Boon. It's the Flask generation. This is what makes Pathfinder Pathfinder. Everything else is, I mean, I think the poison nodes are pretty strong and pretty cool to build around. Don't get me wrong, but it's the flask node for me. Nature's Boon is where it's at, and that's the core of all Pathfinder builds. Everything else is basically just kind of supplementary, in my opinion, of what Pathfinder is. And it would be fun to take that node and put it onto a Raider or put it onto a Deadeye. As for stealing a node from Raider, this is similar to Assassin, where I thought like all the nodes are pretty like generically good. There's not like really any weak nodes in the Raider tree, but at the same time, they're just not like next level strong or worth building around or anything like that, in my opinion. So I wouldn't really choose any of these Ascendancy nodes. Like if I was a Raider, I'd be happy to steal Nature's Boon. I'd be happy to steal Tailwind. But if I'm a Deadeye, I'm not stealing a Raider node. I'm stealing Nature's Boon. It's no contest there type of thing. So I think Raider's good overall. Like just they're all generically good nodes, but none of them really stick out as super strong to me. Now, when I was looking at the Duelist, this one I actually had a lot of nodes that I picked out and I thought these are strong nodes, which is weird because I don't make Duelist very often, but I do view some of them as their nodes as really nice for build defining or really strong. For build defining, Masterful Form is one I picked up that I think is really cool to build around. There's not too many builds that can make use of this, but I still think it's one of those nodes that can be really crazy if you start scaling up and you start min-maxing into it. And then another one I thought that I would pick is Overwhelm. The ability to fix a weapon with bad crit, I think is just so strong and so build enabling for different, say, unique items that just have terrible crit with them, but they have a lot of good scaling otherwise. This is another node I would pick. Next nodes I think of Master of Metal. Say I was doing a Pillar of the Cage God Slayer, I would want Master of Metal, or I was doing a build that scales Impale or scales Fizz hits. Master of Metal is just so strong damage-wise, I think you can't really ignore this. Other strong nodes, of course, would be Fortitude. This is an example of nodes where I think the node going up to it is not really that strong. It's decent, but it's not like you look at other Ascendancy points and there's a lot of other strong things out there. And so Fortitude is probably one of the ones I'd pick because of how hard it is to get Fortify these days. It seems it's getting a lot more difficult. And then last but not least is probably First to Strike, Last to Fall. This one, I think I got solely convinced this was a really good node when watching Rutu play a Molten Strike character that would proc Adrenaline with the Ward unique boots, and he would just basically keep hitting himself or self-hitting himself to just continually proc that, I believe was the case. And it led to incredibly insane sustain, not to mention the attack damage, the attack speed, and the movement speed you get from Adrenaline. I think this is a really crazy node to build around, and so it would be fun to snag that node while being a different Ascendancy. And then Gladiator, I ended up picking two of these nodes, and that's Arena Challenger because 20% action speed is pretty good, and I think you can get Arena Charge uptime pretty decent without too much trouble on most builds. Maybe you have to be able to build, but I don't think so. And I think Arena Challenge is pretty good for that, so I would pick this node. And then also Gratuitous Violence, another of the only accessible Ascendancy points that can get you explode into a build, and not to mention that it's pretty build enabling for a bleed build. If you wanted to do a bleed build outside of Gladiator, you could do it with a Slayer, you could do it with a Champion, you could do it with a Slayer. So I picked Gratuitous Violence. Now, moving on to the Marauder tree. I gotta go straight to the big boy. It's Undeniable. In case you don't know, Undeniable is accuracy stacking, and accuracy stacking is one of the strongest scaling builds in the game, and it makes Juggernaut the go-to class to pick. All this other stuff is only kind of like decent. It's really Undeniable that hard carries and is basically like the sole reason you choose Juggernaut for an accuracy stacker. If you can play something like a Berserker and scale Giga damage and then steal Undeniable, I'm pretty sure you're doing that. So I could very well see accuracy stackers that are Berserkers that are stealing Undeniable. No contest. It's an insane notable to steal. I would say that's probably one of the best and strongest Ascendancy points to steal and build around. Other things I would probably pick are Unbreakable. I think this is one of the more interesting Ascendancy points due to the regen. due to the damage reduction, the ability to sustain based on the physical damage you reduce. I think is pretty cool. So I think that's another one I would potentially want to build around or get some tankiness from. So those are probably 2 picks I'd take from Juggernaut. As for Berserker, Aspect of Carnage is always just a really strong node, but it's super generic, so I wouldn't pick it, but it's probably one of the best nodes you can do with this just because of how good it is in terms of damage. Not many Ascendancy points give you 40% more damage. But I think I would actually pick Rite of Ruin. If you can find a way to get Rage in your build to then have the Rage effect tripled, this seems to me like probably the strongest node to steal from Berserker. I could be wrong about that. I don't make a ton of Berserkers. Maybe Blitz charges could be better. I don't know, though. I think it's Rite of Ruin is the strongest point of Berserker, but of course, I'm open to be wrong because I'm not an expert at playing Berserkers. I don't play them too often. And then last but not least, we have Chieftain, and as I mentioned earlier, I think the ability to stack charges more, like say if you wanted to stack a bunch of endurance charges if you're a Juggernaut, I would be tempted to steal Valakos. As for the other nodes here, maybe you could go for some like Fizz Conversion, take a build where you take an item and you need that other 50% conversion. Maybe Namahus is something you take, but for the most part, it's probably Valakos Storm's Embrace. Granted, if you're a POB warrior, I think the 2 Kohamos War Herald is probably actually maybe the choice you make because of how much damage you can get technically on your POB numbers, but summoning an Ancestral Protector and a War Chief Totem every time on a boss, I just think is super tedious and not fun to do, so I don't necessarily know if I would like choosing that myself. So that's it. That's my list of the strongest Ascendancy points I would pick if I were able to get the Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame. I think it's some really cool potential. I'm of course excited about building my Inquisitor, and I will definitely be looking for nodes that give, for example, something like Radiant Faith or something like Sanctuary of Thought, stuff like that, or Righteous Providence or Pious Path. All those could be really, really fun to build around. So that is why those unique items as the Reveal Ghosts are my top picks for coolest items. There are a lot of fun build enabling uniques this league that are really strong for boss drops and stuff, and I'm excited to like farm those bosses and try to acquire these items and stuff, but these definitely are my top pick. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you all for watching, and let me know in the comments what your top pick for the coolest unique item is, or what Ascendancy points you think you would choose over the ones I chose here if you have things that you think are better or just more build enabling than the ones I picked here. Anyways, take care, Exiles. Have a good one.